Hello students, in this video we are going to study the lesson Indigo written by Louis Fischer. Louis Fischer was born in Philadelphia. He served as a volunteer in the British Army between 1918 and 1920. Fischer made a career as a journalist and wrote the New York Times, the Saturday Review, and for European and Asian publications. He was an admirer of Gandhiji. He visited Gandhiji in 1942 and Gandhiji narrated him the incident which prompted him to fight against the British. He wrote his biography, The Life of Mahatma Gandhi. This excerpt, Indigo, is taken from that book. This book has been reviewed as one of the best books ever written on Gandhiji by Times Educational Supplement. Rajkumar Shukla, a poor peasant, came to Gandhiji with the problem of exploitation in his district. Gandhiji visited the place and freed the people of Champaran from tyranny. With this introduction of the chapter, now let us know about its story more clearly. In December 1916, Gandhiji went to Lucknow to attend the annual convention of the Indian National Congress. There were 2,301 delegates and many visitors. A poor illiterate peasant, Rajkumar Shukla, came there to complain against the injustice meted out to the peasants in Champaran. He met Gandhiji. Gandhiji had never heard of Champaran. He had many engagements, so he did not give any assurance to Shukla. But Shukla was resolute. He followed Gandhiji wherever he went. At last, Gandhiji fixed a date. He told Shukla to meet him at Calcutta on a particular date. At Calcutta, Gandhiji found Shukla waiting for him. Both of them went to Patna by train. Shukla led Gandhiji to the house of a lawyer, Rajendra Prasad. They could not see him as he was out of town. But the servants knew Shukla. He had been there several times to request the lawyers to help the Indigo sharecroppers. They let them stay on the grounds. They took Gandhiji for another peasant and untouchable. They did not allow them to draw water from the well, lest the entire water in the well be polluted. Gandhiji decided to visit Muzaffarpur before Champaran to obtain more complete information about the conditions prevalent in the area. He sent a telegram to Professor J.B. Kriplani, whom he had met at Shantiniketan. Kriplani came to the station with his students to receive Gandhiji. At Muzaffarpur, Gandhiji stayed in the house of Mr. Malkani, a government school teacher. In those days, Indians were afraid to harbour men like Gandhiji who were advocates of home rule, but Malkani had courage. News of Gandhiji's arrival in Muzaffarpur and his mission spread quickly. Sharecroppers came to Muzaffarpur to see him. The lawyers also called on him. They briefed him about their cases. Gandhiji chided the lawyers for collecting heavy fees from poor peasants. He thought that law courts were useless for the crushed and fear-stricken peasants. The real relief for them was to be free from fear. British landlords held large estates in Champaran. Indians worked as sharecroppers on their land. By a long-term agreement, the sharecroppers were compelled to plant 15% of their holdings with indigo and surrender the entire indigo produced to the landlords as rent. Harvesting indigo was an irksome business for the peasants. Recently, the landlords had heard that Germany had developed synthetic indigo. British landlords knew that prices of indigo would fall and planting indigo was no longer profitable. They offered to release the sharecroppers from their obligation to harvest indigo, but they demanded compensation. Many peasants agreed, but others resisted. Soon, the peasants learnt about the synthetic indigo. Those who had paid compensation demanded their money back. Dispute arose between the landlords and sharecroppers. The landlord hired thugs. The sharecroppers engaged lawyers. Then Gandhiji arrived in Champaran. He began by trying to get the facts from the secretary of the British Landlords Association. He refused to give information to an outsider. Gandhiji said that he was not an outsider. Next, Gandhiji called on the British official commissioner of the Tirhat division. The commissioner started bullying Gandhiji and advised him to leave Tirhat. Instead of leaving the area, Gandhiji went to Motihari, the capital of Champaran. Gandhiji made it his headquarters. He started his investigations. A peasant was maltreated in a nearby village. Gandhiji decided to go and find facts, but the police stopped him. He was served with a notice to leave Champaran. Gandhiji wrote back that he would not obey the notice. Consequently, Gandhiji was summoned to appear in a court. Gandhiji sent a report to the Viceroy. The peasants learnt that the Mahatma who wanted to help them was in trouble with the authorities. Thousands of peasants gathered around the court building. This spontaneous show of their courage baffled the British authorities. They felt powerless. Gandhiji helped them to regulate the trial. In the court, Gandhiji pleaded guilty. He asked for penalty. He read out a statement. He said he was faced with conflict of duties. He respected the lawful authority. He was not a lawbreaker, but he could not disregard the voice of his conscience to do humanitarian and national service. The judge said he would take several days to deliver the judgment, but he let Gandhiji go free. Gandhiji asked his lawyer friends what they would do if he went to jail. They replied they would go home. Gandhiji asked again what would happen to the poor peasants. Then the lawyers felt ashamed. Gandhiji, who was a stranger, was willing to go to jail for their sake. The lawyers claimed to have been serving the peasants. Going home would mean shameful betrayal. They told Gandhiji that they too would follow him into jail. Gandhiji was pleased. He declared that the Battle of Champaran was won. He then divided the group into two pairs and put down the order in which each pair would court arrest. The Lieutenant Governor of the province decided to drop the case against Gandhiji. This was the victory of civil disobedience. Gandhiji and lawyers conducted an inquiry into the complaints of the peasants. About 10,000 peasants deposed. Documents were collected. Gandhiji was summoned by Sir Edward Gate, the Lieutenant Governor. He met the Lieutenant Governor 4 times. An official commission of inquiry was appointed. Gandhiji remained in Champaran initially for 7 months and then came for several shorter visits. The official inquiry assembled evidence against the big planters. They agreed in principle to make refunds to the peasants. Gandhiji asked only 50%. The representative of the planters offered to refund up to 25%. Gandhiji agreed. The deadlock was broken. He had a moral victory. Gandhiji explained that amount of money was not important. By agreeing to refund the peasants money, the landlords had lost their prestige. They were no longer dreaded. The peasants learned they had rights and there were people to defend their rights. Few years, the British planters abandoned their estates. These now went back to the peasants. Indigo sharecropping disappeared. Gandhiji wanted to do something to remove the cultural and social backwardness in Champaran's villages. He appealed for teachers. 2 young disciples of Gandhiji, Mahadev Desai and Narhari Parikh, and their wives volunteered for work. Several more came from Bombay, Pune and other distant parts of the land. Devdas, Gandhiji's youngest son, arrived from the ashram and so did Mrs. Gandhi. Primary schools were opened in 6 villages. Kasturba taught the ashram rules on personal cleanliness and community sanitation. Health conditions were miserable. Gandhiji got a doctor to volunteer his services for 6 months. 3 medicines were available: castor oil, quinine and sulfur ointment. Gandhiji noticed the filthy state of women's clothes. One woman told Kasturba that she had only one sari. During his long stay in Champaran, Gandhiji kept a long distance watch on the ashram and sent regular instructions by mail. The Champaran episode was a turning point in Gandhiji's life. It did not begin as an act of defiance. It grew out of an attempt to lessen the sufferings of the poor peasants. Gandhiji's politics was closely connected with the practical day-to-day problems of the millions. He tried to mold a new free Indian who could stand on his own feet and thus make India free. Charles Freer Andrews was devoted follower of Gandhiji. He came to Champaran. Gandhiji's lawyer friends wanted him to stay on to help them, but Gandhiji opposed the idea. He said, "The cause is just and you must rely upon yourselves to win the battle." Thus, self-reliance, Indian independence and help to sharecroppers were all bound together. With this explanation, we have come to the end of this lesson.